Do we know at this point, because there are many different sources for plant protein? I mean, we have pea protein, we have hemp protein, we have rice protein. Is there one that's maybe more sus than the others, or are they all generally, potentially contaminated today?
I think I would probably try to avoid rice or some of them. We see more like the arsenic and so on sneaking into rice. What we've seen, we've tested a lot of different protein powders over the last 10 years probably. What we see in general, pea tend to do better. So pea tend to do better on the purity side of it. So that's what we focused on. We also have a pea protein actually in our portfolio, but it's been one of those products where when we get peas, even from the same lot, like from the same place, from the same farmer, we see variation of 4x on the amount of heavy metals. And if you're getting borderline close to, let's say, Proposition 65 limits in your serving, a 4x difference from the same supplier is pretty. That means a horrible product versus like a product that will be within the limits, right? And again, we generally recommend the whey because that's where we see by far a more consistent, pure, source.
Lower levels of heavy metals.
Exactly.
There was also a distinction between the different flavors, right? Like certain flavorings.
It's a very good point, yeah, because I think cacao bean, and I love cacao. Like, who doesn't love dark chocolate? Like a good quality cacao bean, right? So it's something, and it's a good ingredient. Like if you look at it from a nutrition perspective, like cacao is a great plant, but it tends to also be great at like removing these things out of the crust and soil. So you will tend to see more heavy metals, and especially lead and cadmium, what they saw in the cacao testing. So, and we've seen that too. So we have a cacao flavored whey protein. And we've been through, I think, maybe around 10 or 11 different organic cacao farmers and manufacturers. And we now have had to make a different set of test procedure in our production facility. So when we get the cacao beans in, even from the same area, they have to be first tested for heavy metals prior to going into production. Because the whole purpose of what we've been trying to do as a brand is we test the final product, like the end product, the consumer-facing product, the one that's would be picked on Amazon or on the website or wherever it's sold. That's where we want to see low levels of heavy metals and so on, and not necessarily in production. But since we've seen that they creep in the end product, we had to do that. Like, this is coming from the cacao, so we have to make that security procedure in there.
Smart. From a human health outcome perspective, I mean, how worrying do you think that these levels are? I mean, obviously some of the levels exceed the Prop 65 thresholds, but California is known for being very conservative.
For sure.
Yeah, like sometimes overly conservative.
I was on a podcast recently as well with Dr. Wendy Myers, and we talked about like actually the supplement industry sometimes gets some really harsh standards because of Proposition 65. And that was kind of her point. But I think we can all agree that we want to get as little heavy metal in our diet as possible. And if we think about what we actually have of tests to prove where we're getting this from, do you know your sweet potatoes? How many heavy metals are in your sweet potatoes? I don't know. No clue. I eat quite a lot of sweet potatoes, right? So I think when it comes to something that I'm buying on a regular basis, adding to my diet as a protein powder, I would go for as close to zero. And I don't think Proposition 65 is too strict. We can adhere to it. We're not like rocket scientists or anything. We can go in that direction and get there. And I think the industry in general can, because consumers vote with their dollars, right? So if we are more people asking for it, we will change. We will find ways. There was another positive finding in that protein study, which I think is really worth mentioning, is when Clean Label Project back, I think it was 2018, did another similar protein study, very big study. They found, I think it was like more than half of the brands had BPA in them, like, bisphenol A, right, basically. And in this study, they found only 3 brands had BPA in it. So I think the brands has done a good job of saying, okay, whether it's the packaging, the facility that they're working with, cross-contamination across when they manufacture the products, they've done a good job eliminating that. So the dream is out of this study that now we will start seeing, an intended focus to remove heavy metals out of your protein powders.
So like awareness actually does drive change within the industry.
It does, because again, if I take ourselves as an example, we buy raw ingredients from the most expensive, high quality raw ingredients manufacturers around the world. And we go to them and we buy, and they don't know these data points when we test them through our labs. They say, hey, we live up to all the standards. We do everything we can. This is organic. We do, like, we try to do good. So my point is, like, when we see a data point that shows 47% of an entire category is above, there's something wrong. And the first step is the clarity and transparency. Second step is then we'll figure out how to get around it. Like we did with cacao, for example, right?
So when consumers are vetting protein brands, should they always be looking out for like a certificate of analysis or what? Like, what are the green flags in terms of what consumers should be looking out for?
I think that's a great starting point, and brands that are available and are willing to share these data points, because you can also reach out if they don't share it online, reach out to your brand and ask for them. But obviously, like, Clean Label Project does a good job having like a Clean Label Project certification. That is just a certification, meaning they test, randomly lots over the year. I think it's 1 or 2 batches, but I think it's only like 5 or 10% of what a brand is doing. And with the variance we've seen in raw materials, we believe sincerely, like we've seen in baby food, that you need to get to a point where every single batch of every single product in a category where there's risk of contamination, like heavy metals and protein powders, should be tested every single time. So that's like the whole purpose we've tried to do with the QR code on a label, so the consumer can scan and see for itself. And I promise you, most people don't do that. So they don't scan the QR code and look for the data point. But like, we should get to that point. And this has come this far that we actually have that now in baby food. With the new baby food rule, I think it's called AB 899, the new baby food law. So now they mandatorily have to, on their website, every baby food manufacturer need to provide like heavy metal reporting, third-party tested heavy metal reporting that the consumer can access.
That's so great.
So I mean, the point is, it can be done.
It can be done, yeah. Mm-hmm. So just to recap a little bit, it's the plant protein powders that seem to be the most that tend to harbor the greatest concentration of these
heavy metals,
unwanted heavy metals, and some sources of plant protein appear to be better than others. Pea being, I suppose,
definitely pea being one of the better ones.
Yeah.
But again, like, the numbers were pretty crazy, I think, on some of the plant proteins, where we are up at 75% is above. So it's like, I can't recall the exact number, but it's like, that's where we especially need some kind of third-party validation. And the certificate of analysis in production, I don't think that is 100% enough. Like, it's a good starting point, but what we've seen sorting raw ingredients ourselves for that long, we see that it doesn't match up with what we get from our third-party lab testing. Can be very big variation in actual amount of heavy metal in the finished product. So we should be able to get there. If baby food can get there, protein powders can get there.
Yeah, especially because now, I mean, as I mentioned, like the wellness, the amount that consumers are spending on these products, it's no longer a cost issue, and economies of scale should bring down the price of testing.
For sure. It's not a cost issue, but there could be. I think we will find a supply issue when we get further down, because, like, obviously, where does all these things come from? Like, whether it's Earth crust or how we treated the world, a lot of these contaminants will take a long time to actually surface in our soil. So when you look at studies on crops and so on, it can take like 30, 50, like depending on like how fast the soil is actually absorbing. It can take a lot of years. And if we look back, how much have we polluted the planet and where we're doing things? I think, unfortunately, we will continue to see things sneak into our supply chain. So, suddenly we were starting to look more at PFAS, for example. Like, when a new chemical that people has been using, do we need to start testing the plants for this as well? And we're like obviously working with a lot of different laboratories to kind of get an idea, but things will continue to surface, unfortunately, due to how we treated the planet, right? So
yeah, I mean, these are like persistent environmental pollutants that have a way of of sneaking up into like the most unsuspecting of places.
For sure. Yeah. To say it
lightly, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that's why the final product transparency is so important, because that will eliminate that. And I think we shouldn't just test. We are also looking at this sometimes, where we shouldn't just be greenwashing and testing everything, because there might not be a risk of a certain, let's say. Here's not a fun story, but it's a story at least. So we were testing, our fish oils for a lot of different things. But among them, we were testing our fish oils for pesticides, which when we looked at it on the outside, will you find pesticides in wild caught anchovies from the ocean? You probably shouldn't, right? So there shouldn't be any pesticide. So isn't it a little bit of greenwashing saying it's pesticide free? We don't want to be that brand. Then, like several years in, we get a batch of our fish oil that has high amount of pesticide in it, and we're like, well, where did that come from?
Yeah, right.
And we go back in supply chain, and we end up finding out that pesticide came actually in the capsulation process, because we in our capsulation process been playing to make the gelatin a little bit more, palatable. To say that we were adding a drop of organic lemon oil to the capsule process. So when they were drying it, it got a little bit of citrusy feel to it, so it felt a little bit better. And we found out that they have actually changed the olive oil that they were, the lemon oil that they were using, without us knowing it in production. So they gone from one, and that's how this manufacturing works, right? So they just replaced it with another one, because obviously you get oil from different places. And suddenly that was a non-organic one that they mixed in, and it had pesticides in them. We know lemons can have pesticides in them.
Wow.
So we found, okay, wow, so we actually need to have some kind of to keep track with what we're doing. I still don't think that pesticides is what I would be most concerned about in fish oil. I don't think that. So I think that was probably more on us. I think that's where, again, it's a heavy metal and it's oxidation and it's maybe some other markers. But again, data points that we should measure in order to be able to make educated consumption.
1,000%. Yeah, I do. I definitely want to talk about fish oil, because fish oil has long been a staple in my supplement regimen, and you guys are my go-to source. I mean, I take you every day, so I definitely want to do a deep dive into that. Hey, if you like that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.